reality walks in with you.
So you want to know about the toughest and loneliest job in Britain? Come to the very heart of government and find out about the private world of the country's most public figure. It's a job that starts with cheers, though it usually ends in tears. The people who can best tell you about it are those who've been Prime Minister themselves, from Harold Macmillan onwards.
I found it much the most relaxed of the offices I held.
A very enjoyable job. You don't get bored, you know, and if I don't get bored, I don't get tired.
Well, you see, there's no standard Prime Minister. Every Prime Minister has his or her own technique.
Being Prime Minister is quite a lonely task.
It's the most fascinating job in the world, and it's just an immense privilege to do it.
When you had been elected and become Prime Minister and you went in for the first time, and I stood by the chair in the centre of the cabinet table around which everybody sits, I stood there for a moment, and it was a very profound feeling. I felt somehow that I'd become a guide to lead the nation into the future, and at the same time a trustee of all that was best in our past. It was almost, without being too pie about it, it was almost a religious sensation for a moment.
Well, I'd been walking into number 10 many, many times over the previous, nearly 20 years. So it doesn't come as anything new. But you just feel general delight, well, we've won that election, now we get on with the job.
I thought you might feel a sense of destiny, you know, what Roy Jenkins calls you were part of the apostolic succession of Prime Ministers.
No, really.
Really?
No. I didn't spend my time looking around and saying how historic this is, Heath. You're now a historic figure in the apostolic succession. No. You get on with the job.
It never occurred to me that I was a woman Prime Minister. My reactions as to whether it was like I might have been those of a woman. It never occurred to me that I was a woman. I was Prime Minister. It was the greatest honour that can come to a British person.
I have just come from the palace where Her Majesty invited me to form an administration.
Our purpose is not to divide, but to unite. And where there are differences, to bring reconciliation.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth.
And I believe it is an immensely worthwhile job to do, because it will be neither easy nor quick. If you will forgive me, I will go into number 10 straight away and make a start right now. Thank you very much indeed.
As Prime Minister, you'll exercise more powers than any other Western leader. The job goes back in an unbroken line to Sir Robert Walpole nearly 3 centuries ago. He survived through a mix of cunning, charm and patronage. He and his successors lined the walls of number 10. Originally, Prime Minister was a term of abuse, meaning a fellow who'd become too big for his boots, for he was only supposed to be primus inter pares, first among equals in the King's Council. But successive Prime Ministers have seen their powers grow. Today, the political essentials remain the same, defending Britain's national interests and improving the condition of the people. But the job has many added duties and pressures. The number 10 staff line up to clap you in when you win election or re-election, demonstrating the civil servant's loyalty to whoever is the elected Prime Minister.
I've only got one thing to say. It's nice to be back.
And when the kissing has to stop, you must get down to work at once.
You see, under our system, we haven't got any time to waste, because everybody expects the cabinet to be appointed by the next day, and then the rest of the government by the Sunday evening, and to be announced on the BBC 6 o'clock news. Well, you've got to interview 18, 19 people and ask them to do the job.
The power of patronage is the glue that holds the whole thing together. If you're a young member of Parliament and you want a ministerial office, you've got to please the Prime Minister. If you're an old man and you want a peerage, you've got to please the Prime Minister. And for everyone who benefits by patronage, there are 9 who've tried to benefit but don't get it. So the penumbra of patronage is enormous. And that's how Prime Ministers control things.
When you choose your cabinet, you have to decide on the balance. Do you stuff it with your chums and cronies and exclude your political enemies? Or do you follow the American President Lyndon Johnson's famous motto that it's better to have them inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in?
Usually in any cabinet, about a third of the members will be Prime Ministers, men and women. That is to say, they will be people who will look for the lead the Prime Minister hints at or offers them. They will not be people with distinct opinions of their own. And that was certainly true of Harold Wilson's cabinet. And that enabled him to deal with the mixture of prima donnas and brilliant people that he had in his cabinet as well. I think it's an absolute necessity for a Prime Minister to have the strong members of his party in the cabinet if he can. They're going to be much more tedious outside.
I tried to keep our party together for God knows how many years now, and I did it by having all the extremes in the cabinet.
Or you may want to follow Mrs. Thatcher's style in choosing your cabinet. She did, after all, serve longer than any other Prime Minister this century. She once said that she couldn't waste time with internal arguments in the cabinet. What mattered most to her was to be the leader of a small group of true believers.
I've always thought there was something Leninist about Mrs. Thatcher, which came through in the style of government. The nice side of Lenin, let's say, not the ideology, but the absolute determination, the belief that there's a vanguard which is right. And if you keep that small, tightly knit team together, they will drive things through, get things done.
I had said right at the beginning, when I knew the enormity of the task, the running up the down escalator, give me 6 strong men and true, and we'll get through. I don't think I ever had 6 at any one time.
You just can't get the ministers, you know. But inside Number 10, your staff will be the pick of the civil service high flyers, like Robin Butler, private secretary to 3 prime ministers, who's now Whitehall's top mandarin. It's the job of your private office to drive the Number 10 machine, known as the Rolls-Royce of government, and designed to give you a silky smooth ride.
It's a very small organisation. That's what strikes you about it most. In a way, that's its greatest strength, because with so few people, the lines of communication in Number 10 are very short. The dozen or so people who are the sharp end there walk into the Prime Minister at any time of day or night to put their problem to him, get a sense of direction and instruction.
Well, clearly, what we're going to need to bring together is an updated summary of precisely where we are with the governmental and non-governmental help for the Kurds.
Your life inside Number 10 will be dominated by paper. Reams of it comes in every day from Whitehall and the outside world. Much of it you won't even see. Your private office will sift through it and only send you what they regard as the most important stuff.
Margaret, could you just slip this one in? It's something that PM can see.
It'll come to you in the famous red boxes for your view or decision.
At weekends, they're usually about 4, and at nights, usually 2. It isn't any trouble to do them. They're always interesting, and I know the day will come when I don't have to do them. And I know I won't like it when it does come.
What we tried to do would be on the top of any pile of papers, however voluminous and complicated, to strip it to its essentials. Sometimes you could do it in one word. Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary says we should go to war with Iran, agree, ? And she can write yes or no.
Often your written response as Prime Minister to your private secretary's covering note will in fact be just a few words long.
Sometimes you have to build that up into a rather sort of fuller response to a minister. If he's put in a lot of thought to a major paper and it comes out with no written in it exclamation mark, you can't just write back a letter saying the Prime Minister has read the Chancellor of the Exchequer's paper and says no. You have to, drawing on your knowledge of the Prime Minister's mind, you have to perhaps enlarge that into a paragraph of carefully considered views which are contrary to those of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, leading to a balanced conclusion. But that's part of the art and craft of the trade of private secretary.
As well as the politically neutral civil servants in your private office, as Prime Minister you'll appoint your own political advisor to tell you what your party will or won't wear. Douglas Hurd did it for Ted Heath.
I had my own access to the Prime Minister. There was a black box, which I was responsible for, and went to him every night, and which the civil servants did not see. And I could put in that my musings, my thoughts about anything. And because I'd worked with Ted before, I mean, I knew that he would read them. Often they'd come back with just a tick, and sometimes he'd say a couple of days later, I thought you had more sense than that. You know, there wasn't a great warm appreciation all the time, but I knew, you know, he would take notice.
Of course, it's not all done on paper. Your staff will always be looking for a chance to buttonhole you for a quiet word. What's known technically in Downing Street as lurking.
What one learns at number 10 is that proximity to the top man means access, and access means influence, and influence means power and patronage. So yes, lurking is a very important part of the business.
As well as your red box and your political black box, you'll get yet another box that only the most privileged eyes may see.
In my time we had a separate box which was of a different colour from the main box for particularly sensitive papers, which only the Prime Minister and the Principal Private Secretary had access to.
And what colour was that box?
It was blue with a red stripe in my days, and it was known by Mr. Wilson as Old Stripey.
Old Stripey is still on active service in number 10 today. And this had the sort of secret intelligence files and the spy stuff.
And highly confidential stuff, not just intelligence, but other highly confidential and personal stuff which the Principal Private Secretary was dealing with directly with the Prime Minister.
And was Old Stripey the one that the Prime Minister would turn to first, as far as you know?
Quite often it was, because it tended to have the sort of juicy stuff in it.
Over 30 years ago, the globe-trotting Harold Macmillan identified a new hazard for a modern Prime Minister.
It is in airports that television chooses to lurk. You go by sea, you go by road, you go by rail, nobody bothers you very much. But if you go by air, there it is, that hot, pitiless, probing eye. After 14 hours of travel, you get off the aeroplane wanting only a shave and a bath. Oh no, you are cornered. The lights in your eyes, the camera's whizzing. You put up your hand to shade your eyes, and the next day there you are, in the Daily Clarion, looking weary, old, worried, over a caption which implies that you are past it.
Media pressures have grown tenfold today. A gaffe can be halfway around the world before your spin doctors have got their boots on. Modern communications mean you're constantly on call. You need to learn to concentrate on what's important, but also to spot a crisis in the making.
The Prime Minister needs to have an ability to switch his mind almost instantly from one topic to another, and as he does so, when he goes to another topic, to tune in to previous discussion and previous consideration of that topic without a hiccup.
To see the pressures on a modern Prime Minister, take a look at a pretty typical week.
This is not just a government that does not know how to accept blame. It is a government that knows no shame.
They have got away with it, and they've got away with it by just one.
There are no deals, and there are going to be no deals, and I think everyone is aware of that. Difficult decisions still lie ahead.
Clearly tired, he was furious with the statement from the IRA.
It seems, frankly, rather like a sick joke.
The Prime Minister was dog-tired.
He went into a meeting to discuss highly contentious matters about Hong Kong.
News of the Shadow Welsh Secretary's comments reached the Prime Minister in Bangkok.
I'm absolutely astonished.
The moment the Prime Minister stepped off his plane from Bangkok, banks of television cameras, photographers and reporters went into action.
One of the most illustrious of our Prime Ministers was William Pitt the Younger, who died of a mixture of overwork and port. And he used to drink a bottle of port after breakfast, a bottle of port after lunch, and a bottle of port after dinner. And I have to tell you, after 6 years in Downing Street, I know precisely how he felt.
Sometimes it begins to look as if leaders get burnt out pretty quick in office these days.
Do I look burnt out?
Well,
you really think I look burnt out?
Not physically, but it's just possible you could be politically burnt out.
I've been getting a bit worried about you with all the strain you've had at London School of Economics. I'm all right.
No, I didn't mean physically burnt out. But look, Macmillan had a full term, and then in that case physically was out. Indeed, you know, historically, you're very nearly already at a record position. At the end of this Parliament, you'll have had 7 years, practically. If you got a second term and ran to 12, you'd have the record since Lord Liverpool.
How old would I be then?
I suppose what?
Be 3 years younger than Macmillan was when he started, or Attlee. You see, I started young. You've got to be fit in this job, Bob.
Every Prime Minister lives by the Downing Street maxim that there are only 25 hours in a day. So it's probably best to spend some of them asleep.
The great advantage I have, I'm very lucky I can sleep anywhere. I had 7 hours sleep last night, went out like a light when I went to bed, woke up, well, my wife woke me with a cup of tea at 8 o'clock.
He could always take a cat nap. He believed that he could take 6 deep breaths and be asleep. And if he couldn't get asleep then he wasn't tired.
Current Prime Minister has become accustomed to getting by on 5 hours sleep every single night.
Mrs. Thatcher used to sleep about 3 hours a night for weeks and months at a time.
Sometimes I would come back from Parliament 10:30, 11, 11:30, just a little bit tired, but I know I've got 2 or 3 hours work ahead. And just then I'll just sit down in an armchair and just doze off for 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'm fine. I can go until about 2 o'clock in the morning.
She was always very reluctant to contemplate a holiday. I remember once, just before Christmas, she was saying, well, I suppose we shan't meet again until January the 4th or something, in tones of the utmost gloom. And some minister was foolish enough to say, a little later in the discussion, there's a report coming out on, I think, December the 28th, Prime Minister, which will be very germane. Oh, I think we may have to meet then. She was like that.
As Prime Minister, you may prefer to follow Macmillan's example and take a more relaxed view of the job. You can spend time polishing your ad-libs, seeking the mot juste for your speeches, and leave your cabinet colleagues to get on with it.
You can't run everybody's department for them, any more than you can in business, not if it's a big business.
Even today, you can still run the Premiership in a way that allows you both to relax and to concentrate on essentials, but first you must free yourself from the tyranny of the red boxes.
The best-kept secret in Britain is that the job of Prime Minister need not be oppressive in terms of time. There need not be a huge multitude of boxes. It is possible to organise the Prime Ministership so that that doesn't happen, and actually rather important, because if you're crowded out, your days are crowded out by boxes, then you don't have time to think, to reflect, and to talk with friends.
If the Prime Minister tries to run all the departments, the whole structure is not set up for that. It's set up on the basis of departmental civil servants, permanent secretaries, committees of Parliament. It simply will not work if you try to push it under the Prime Minister.
When I was Prime Minister in the 60s, hardly a single one of them been in the Cabinet. I had to go and do everything. It was like, football, taking the set-piece occasions, goalkeeper, taking the penalties and the corners. Now, of course, I have a very talented and experienced cabinet. Even so, I like to know all that's going on.
I had no desire to be absolutely au fait with everything that was going on. I trusted my colleagues in the cabinet and hoped that they wouldn't commit too many boobs, or if they seemed likely to, they would come and tell me about it before the explosion happened.
One advantage of not trying to do your colleagues' jobs for them is that you can concentrate on the big picture and think about the longer term.
Ice cream for those who smiled after lunch.
You'll even have more time to spend at Chequers with your extended family.
One of the great enjoyments and pleasures of being Prime Minister, of which there are many, one of them is that you can pick and choose to some extent. You have a room for manoeuvre, you have some space in which you can choose what you're going to be interested in. Of course, there are some things that always come up. I mean, the economy is always there, like Banquo's ghost, to haunt you. There are these other problems of international matters which will surround you, but you've always got a space, and that's one of the most enjoyable parts of the office, you know.
May I ask you now whether you enjoyed being Prime Minister, or did the burdens outweigh the pleasures?
Enormously. First of all, I have no patience at all with people like poor old Ramsay MacDonald, who used to go about saying, I feel like a weary Titan carrying the world on it. But nobody asked him to carry the world on his shoulders. If anybody takes that self-pitying point of view, the answer is, tu l'as voulu, Georges Dandin. You asked for it. And there are plenty of shoulders quite ready to accept the burden the moment you slip out of it. No, it was great fun.
You'll find your own way of switching off and relaxing. And this will help give you a sense of balance and perspective.
Four calling birds, 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves. Five gold rings.
Nobody should ever overdo it, you know. You can't make good judgments unless you should read Jane Austen, and then you feel better, and then they come into some awful crisis. Having read about Pride and Prejudice and so on, you feel better.
I will read many different things. It may be a detective story. It may be a Freddie Forsyth. I think I'm rereading The Fourth Protocol at the moment.
I love books. I'm apt to pick up a book whenever I see one. I must have hundreds of books at home that I haven't yet read.
I used to get letters from obviously angry ladies saying, don't you understand that we elect you and we pay you to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And yet we see that last Saturday you were sailing. So I then used to write back politely and say, if you work all these hours that you demand, you drive yourself into the wall. And then you start making mistakes. And it isn't the politicians who suffer, it's the people who suffer. But if I race on a Saturday, I get away from it all. And when I get back to my desk, then I'm refreshed.
I don't have time to relax very much. And let me put it this way, I'm always on the job. People think of that.
In running your cabinet, you have a choice. You can either do it as a traditional chairman seeking consensus, or you can be like Mrs. Thatcher. She saw consensus as a dirty word and believed she had to be a dynamic chief executive who offered no alternatives.
When it came to cabinet, she would lead from the front. And some people found this difficult, almost intolerable, because they thought she was dictating the answer before the question had been put.
Mrs. Thatcher's idea of chairing a meeting would be to arrive, announce the conclusions, and challenge all comers to fight her for them.
I think sometimes the Prime Minister should be intimidating. There's not much point in being a weak, floppy thing in the chair, is there?
So what's a chap to do if the person he's chosen as the statutory woman in his cabinet is one Margaret Thatcher? Would she sometimes go on a bit in cabinet?
Occasionally, not very often. Then you have to begin to tap the table.
Make it clear.
Everybody knows that signal. Or they did.
In fact, although both of them are irritated if you suggest it, Ted Heath and Margaret Thatcher had rather similar styles. They are both very definite people, not by instinct very patient of dissent, but knowing that they have to listen. They are both impatient and authoritative people, and that may be one reason why they didn't get on particularly well together.
But they did run their cabinets in different ways. Heath preferred to involve his whole cabinet in decision-making, unlike Mrs. Thatcher, who would reach key decisions with very small groups of ministers. He used to have 2 cabinet meetings a week, while she had 1.
Ones who have one, I think, tend to decide too many things without the cabinet.
You mean that they have sort of small group of ministers and they don't? You think of anyone in particular?
I am, yes. But that causes controversy inside the cabinet with the people who haven't been given a chance of expressing their views.
You may want to follow John Major's example in the way you run the cabinet. You keep what he memorably called the bastards inside the cabinet. And to try to reconcile differences and conjure up agreement between opposing factions, you use all your skills as a chairman.
He doesn't lead from the front. He quite often arranges who does, and indeed makes sure that he knows what they're going to say.
We go straight on to another meeting. You have to be very quick. 1 minute.
There's a lot of orchestration, but he prefers to listen and to wait, and then to put in his own intervention late, at the end. He chairs in, I would suppose, the traditional chairman's way.
Good morning. Shall we begin then in the...
You don't have to shout and stamp your foot to make decisions. It's not always the people who shout loudest who have the most to say. And is often someone who perhaps is a little reserved about putting forward an idea, who perhaps has something that's wholly original, that ought to be properly examined. So I do encourage that. It does often mean longer cabinets, but I think that is worthwhile.
Thus far it seems to go well.
Whatever your cabinet style, there'll be times when you'll need to be ruthless, because you may have to kneecap your closest political colleagues. After promising to sink or swim with Norman Lamont, Major threw his Chancellor out of the boat, just as Macmillan had done in the Night of the Long Knives, causing one MP to remark, "Greater love hath no man, he lays down his friends for his life."
The sorrow and bitterness and heartburning of these changes comes from the man who has to make them. The emotion is your part, because it's very unpleasant. It's the only part of political life that I find very uncongenial.
The terrifying thing and frightening thing for me, and it's the worst job I ever have to do here, is that means having to, if some people to come on the ladder, some people have to climb off. And it's not because they've done the job badly at all. It is because you have to keep movement in politics in order to keep people with something to go for.
I think it was Asquith who said, perhaps in this very building, that a Prime Minister must be a good butcher. Are you a good butcher, Mrs. Thatcher?
No, I'm not a good butcher, but I've had to learn to carve the joint.
But if you find political butchery not to your taste, you will have one weekly engagement that almost every Prime Minister relishes. The confidential audience with the Queen, where you report on current politics. The monarch has little real power left. She can only advise, encourage and warn. But she's known as a canny judge of political form.
With this Queen, of course, her knowledge, every cabinet paper she reads, every cabinet discussion, every foreign telegram. And her knowledge is so great that she was, not only you serve her, but she serves any Prime Minister who's wise enough to allow her to do so.
After his weekly audiences, he always came back walking that little bit taller. I think he found talking to her immensely rewarding. I remember him coming back when the Queen had told him that she was pregnant, and he was terribly pleased. It was as if, you know, one of his own children had said she was going to have another baby, and he really enjoyed that, and he felt very much that that relationship was something he cherished.
The Queen has only once talked publicly about these confidential audiences. These are her words.
I have had quite a lot of Prime Ministers, starting with Winston, and some stayed longer than others. They unburden themselves, or they tell me what's going on, or if they've got any problems. And sometimes one can help in that way too.
One could discuss with the Queen matters that one would not even always discuss with one's colleagues. And being Prime Minister is quite a lonely task. There are things that you have to keep to yourself, rather.
What sort of things?
Well, personal matters, relations with other cabinet colleagues. The Queen was always very interested in that kind of relationship.
I think it's rather nice to feel that one's a sort of sponge, and everybody can come and tell one things. And some things stay there, and some things go out the other ear, and some things never come out at all. One just knows about it.
I don't think I'm betraying confidences when I say I think that were occasions when she could talk to me about her personal issues, and probably to other prime ministers too, in a much more easy way than perhaps she could talk to them with others.
They want to tell her things, this reassuring, tweedy lady. And the interesting thing about her, of course, is with the exception of a couple of them, they were in love with her. They always fall in love with the Queen, they can't help themselves.
Professor Peter Hennessy says that all prime ministers fall in love with the Queen.
I'm not going to disclose who I am in love with. I'm in love with my wife.
The Prime Minister and Mr. Thatcher.
Your relationship with the Queen may be much more testing if you can sometimes be mistaken for a feudal monarch yourself.
Mrs. Thatcher thought the weekly audiences were a waste of time, but of course she prepared meticulously, and she got really bored at having to go down to the dine and sleeps at Windsor. Everybody else looks forward to it, you see, but not Mrs. Thatcher. Very difficult relationship, relatively speaking. Very courteous, much respect each way, but not warm. But of course Mrs. Thatcher couldn't fall in love with her.
Prime Minister's Question Time, where the arrival of the TV cameras has significantly raised the stakes.
Order! The Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition are British parliamentarians and be respected as such and not as Roman gladiators when they're...
Every Prime Minister is born disliking Question Time. On the other hand, if he's a Democrat, he knows he's got to face it. I think if you've got a Prime Minister who said he enjoys Question Time and isn't sensitive to all the questions put, I think democracy is in danger.
The important thing was to dominate the House of Commons. Never to give in, never to show how nervous and awful the whole business is, any kind of emotion much, and earned a certain reputation. I think I did what was called unflappability. They only knew how one was inside was flapping all the time. They wouldn't have said that.
The House is very noisy these days. And you know that the people asking the questions aren't always interested in the answers. They're more interested in putting you off your stroke. So you go in, having had endless preparation.
In many ways, Question Time is loaded in your favour. Your staff will try to anticipate likely questions and will provide you with what Mrs. Thatcher liked to call killer facts, which she kept in a folder known as the Plastic Fantastic.
Let's do the Ethiopian question. Let's make certain we've got all of the facts figures, so that's a substantive one, isn't it?
I have very little lunch that day because you want the blood to go to the brain and not to digest what you've got in the tummy. Then as I go in, it's always now keep calm and concentrate.
Mr. Speaker, after 3 general election victories, leading the only party with clear policies resolutely carried out, I intend to continue.
Prime Minister's Questions is just a shouting match on a appallingly low level. This is why the people who watch that television all the time now have really no respect for Parliament.
When John Major faced his first Question Time, his honeymoon with the House lasted precisely 4 seconds.
The first question to a great new Prime Minister, sir.
John Major was to make effective use of Question Time during the period when he did suddenly resign as Tory leader 4.5 years later. In an unprecedented ploy, he decided to challenge the assorted right-wing Eurosceptics who'd been undermining his leadership to come out into the open. And his media gurus had provided him with an appropriate soundbite.
It is time to put up or shut up.
Major then had an unusual request for what he wanted from his aides for Question Time.
Today, I want everyone to think of lots of jokes. So instead of the normal policy questions, we racked our brains looking for good jokes.
Hill found his comic material when it was learnt that telephone lines were being installed in campaign headquarters for Michael Portillo a leading cabinet Eurosceptic.
Cabinet ministers are setting up telephone lines in campaign offices for the second round of the election.
I can say, Madam Speaker, I can say the speed at which these matters can be done is a tribute to privatisation.
Jonathan Hill's telephone joke helped Major project a confident, unworried image to the backbench electorate. But ironically, being returned to office in either a leadership or general election can have its downside for a Prime Minister. Your enhanced authority may make it even harder for outsiders to come and tell you the unpleasant things that you really ought to hear.
Outsiders come in, and either just before a meeting with the Prime Minister they come to one's office and they say, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to tell him my mind, he's got to stop doing this, he's absolutely mistaken. And of course 5 minutes later they go in and they say, Prime Minister, you're doing an absolutely wonderful job, and I just want to take this opportunity to congratulate you on what you're doing for us all.
Good evening, Mr.
Never let your self-belief turn into a sense of infallibility. Beware of answering your own questions.
Have you all had a good conference? Had a very good conference, yes.
I remember taking a very senior police officer to see her who was introducing a reform entirely within his jurisdiction with which she disagreed. And at the end, he explained it all, and she said, well, you can do as you like, but I shall never agree. And he said, well, in that case, Prime Minister, I can't proceed. And then she said, oh, but you're not cross with me, are you? And she opened her eyes and looked at, I've always thought so highly of you. You're not going away in a bad mood, are you? And the silly ass, he completely crumpled. I mean, he'd had the old one too. He'd had the Prime Minister being authoritative and knocking him down, although he had a perfect right to proceed against her disapproval, and then using feminine characteristics to win him round so he didn't even go away cross.
So if outsiders pull their punches, could Mrs. Thatcher rely on her most senior civil servant to be totally candid?
Totally candid. Life is not long enough to get by without some economy with the truth, in the sense that you probably can't say everything that is relevant all the time. But I never sought to tell her what was not true, or what I thought was untrue, or to spare her what were the unpleasant things that she ought to hear.
Despite the odd gear crash in the Rolls-Royce machine, everything is done to try to make life easy for you and your family inside number 10. But some outsiders have a professional interest in telling Prime Ministers harsh truths.
Just 3 years ago, you got a thumping majority of very nearly 100. Now, you've got the worst standing in the public opinion polls, the worst by-election record in 50 years, and an almost total rejection in local government. Now, how do you personally account for that really spectacular change in fortune?
Yeah, nice picture, isn't it?
How low does your personal rating among your own supporters have to go before you consider yourself a liability to the party you lead?
Well, popularity isn't everything.
You are now the most unpopular Prime Minister for virtually as long as anyone can remember. How do you explain such a remarkable fall from grace?
Jonathan, I'm much less concerned with what people think of me than what I'm actually able to achieve for them.
But it's your contact with the people that you'll find hardest of all to maintain as Prime Minister. Things have changed a great deal since Harold Wilson's day.
I used to go shopping with Harold. If he wanted his Agatha Christie books to read on holiday, we went down to the Army and Navy's book department, and we walked down Victoria Street to get there.
The point is, I've been meeting the people. Mary and I have been meeting the people. Well, we always do anyway, you see. I mean, we are people. Watch out now, watch out.
I can't just easily walk down the street and do my own shopping. I can't just go out for a walk east in St. James's Park. And it does bother me, because I really live by meeting people, and I can't do that quite so informally as I used to.
The Downing Street gates, built under Mrs. Thatcher partly for security reasons, will increase your isolation and make it even harder to keep touch with reality.
It begins as a cocoon because everyone is there to protect you. You don't have to open a car door or anything like that. And it ends up in a kind of bunker mentality when things go wrong.
Bunker mentality is a great danger for a Prime Minister. You're right, it comes from a lot of things. It comes from the sense of being able to exercise power without necessarily having to defer to others. It comes from the feeling that you've been there so long that you know it better than anyone else. From being a major player in the international scene, that you give too much priority to that and less attention to the House of Commons tea room.
You do what Hitler did. You go down into the basement and you pretend that the real world doesn't exist. It's always a danger. I think it's happened to most prime ministers.
Like Harold Wilson, you may become increasingly paranoid, yet you might also develop delusions of omnipotence. Wilson's own were exhibited in a bizarre episode that involved General Idi Amin, the murderous dictator who ruled Uganda.
He was so appalled at what Idi Amin was doing, killing several thousand people a week, that he called me up to his room one day and said that he had been thinking a great deal about this, and he'd come to the conclusion that we had to kill Idi Amin, and he wanted my reaction. I said, although I'd always opposed capital punishment, I thought in this case I was in favour of it. So he decided he would go ahead with it. And so he told the Foreign Office private secretary that we should consider what was necessary to carry out this operation. Foreign Office were in a total panic, it being the rule that you don't assassinate foreign leaders, however bad, and they had to stop the Prime Minister continuing down this road, and they did it by saying, we don't have anyone to do it. God knows what the SAS were for, still.
Wilson was the only post-war Prime Minister to resign apparently of his own free will, saying that he'd lost his zest for the job he once relished.
No, I'm not happy to go. It's a sad moment in many ways, but you do feel a certain relief at the burden falling off your shoulder. As I say, a 7-day-a-week burden. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Premierships seemed to have a natural life cycle. Wilson was one of the few publicly to recognise that his was on the downward slide.
As your premiership deepens, you get more experience, so you think you can cope better because you were less shockable. But at the same time, the kind of bone tiredness gets to you, your reactions slow up. You want to cut corners because life is too difficult, and that can cause problems, particularly if you do it with the cabinet and so on. So the job in many ways is like a prison sentence. They do say they love it, and of course they do, and they get this great surge of adrenaline and they get used to taking decisions and all that. But bit by bit, I think, as performers, as practitioners, as thinkers, in terms of their capacities, they degrade. And very often they're the last person to realise it.
The Prime Minister has had his prostate gland removed.
Harold Macmillan was the only Prime Minister to resign from his hospital bed, where a small incident brought home to him the harsh reality of losing office. When the Queen arrived at the hospital, he handed over his seals of office, kissed hands, and then went to sleep.
When I was Prime Minister, there was a telephone, scrambler telephone by bed, and I got to sleep about in the afternoon after this ordeal. I heard a fellow knocking about in the room, and I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "The post office man come to take away your telephone. You're not entitled to a telephone." I said, "To hell, I was Prime Minister 2 hours ago. You might leave it a bit." "No," he said, "that's the rule." So that was the end of my power, which has never been restored.
We got more votes than the Labour Party did, but we got fewer seats. That's the result of our system. It was a bit of disappointment to us. And we then went into opposition.
It was the winter of discontent that helped bring Jim Callaghan down. Ironically, he'd built his career on his close relations with the trade unions, but now they turned against him.
Would you have liked to have had the job when you were younger and perhaps more energetic? I would very much, well, I would like two things. First of all, to have had a majority, which I didn't have, and B, to have had the office when I was younger and had more energy. And I think I ran out of steam, frankly, at the end.
All right.
Mrs. Thatcher's downfall came after she was gravely wounded in the first ballot for the Tory leadership. The cabinet, which she'd so dominated, turned on her, including almost all of her chosen few.
What hurt most of all was that this was treachery. Well, I had been away at an international conference signing treaties on behalf of my country for the end of the Cold War. It was treachery with a smile on its face.
Whatever your style as Prime Minister, and whatever your personal strengths, you'll only be able to control events for so long. But there are a number of crucial things for a new Prime Minister to remember in order to stay both sane and successful.
The main advice must be the use of time. Work out in advance, roughly, how you're going to use your time and how you're going to set aside time for your own thoughts, your own pleasures, your own friends, your own family. And then you'll get a balance in your life which becomes tolerable, and you can work like hell all the rest of the time.
The absolutely central thing about being a political leader is not to look into the mirror that your aides hold up to you, which is a distorting mirror, and forget that you're actually meant to be leading in the sense of also consulting with many more people than them.
You must be yourself, for better or for worse, and the nation has, unfortunately for itself, to take you as you are.
The essence of a good Prime Minister is not whether they are popular, but whether they are respected because they did things that was right for Britain and which raised the standard and standing of our country.
What do you think are the qualities that are most important that a Prime Minister needs?
He should keep his head. Quite simple.
It's impossible to predict who'll make a good Prime Minister. Some of the most brilliant individuals have been the worst Prime Ministers, and some of the most unassuming, the best. If Labour wins the next election, Tony Blair would come fresh to the toughest of jobs, with no previous experience at all of government. When you're doing the job of Prime Minister, how much is previous experience of ministerial office, how useful is that?
Oh, I found it invaluable. I think you know all the tricks that the departments are going to try to deceive you into doing nothing or doing something that shouldn't be done, because you've seen it from the other side. And although obviously you can become a very good Prime Minister without having any of that background, nevertheless, to know the people involved in both at the permanent secretary level in the civil service and at your ministerial colleagues level is very helpful in getting your own way.
Although experience is useful, it's not absolutely necessary to do the job well. But you will need a range of other qualities.
Mr. Blair! Turn around, please, Mr. Blair!
If you're a historian and a would-be Prime Minister says to you, how do I do the job? Who can I model myself upon? It's very difficult because you can only terrify them witless. Because to do the job properly today, you'd have to have the panache and the flair of a Disraeli, the grandeur of a Gladstone, the brains of an Asquith, the balls of a Lloyd George, the consensual skills of a Baldwin, the word power of a Churchill, the administrative gifts of an Attlee, the managerialism of a Heath, the style of a Macmillan, and the sleep requirements of a Thatcher. And that's a freak. There's never been a human being that comes anywhere near to that. And yet to have a chance of coping, that's what you need to be. Why ever do they want to do the job?
How to make it big in football, next on BBC Two, the Terry Venables story.
The curtain is fallen. La commedia è finita.
Thank you for looking in. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, and God bless.
Enough is enough.